Thank you. And President Terrio?
I've relocated, but I'm still here.
Thank you. Thank you for relocating. You have a quorum. You're not a committee. You're not a committee of the whole yet. We have in the room Directors Grosboll, Hernandez, Rabbit, and Thier. I'll let you know if that changes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. With that, we have our advocate from Sacramento here, Steve Wally. Steve, would you please make your presentation and tell us all the good things that are going on in the big city of Sacramento?
Just give us one moment. Thank you.
Bills are moving forward and how things are moving. Also, kind of concurrent with all this process is the budget process. So the budget subcommittees have been meeting, they've been having a lot of hearings. This year, the budget process is going to be a little, I don't know, different than in the past. While April is like usually the biggest revenue month of the state, and that's what bases the May revise comes out in the middle of May. Probably San Francisco, maybe a few other counties are the only ones that didn't have to file their taxes on April 15th because of all the disasters over the winter. So most all that was delayed until October 15th. So the April numbers are falling way short of what they projected. So it looks even worse than I think they anticipated. So because of that, I expect the budget will be adopted by June 15th and be in place in July 1st. But a lot of the details and other parts that I've been working on likely won't be decided until the end of session, which goes until about mid-September. That way there'll be a little closer, clear picture of what the revenue forecast is as those receipts start coming in towards October 15th and over the summer.
Steve, I don't mean to interrupt you, but isn't part of that because the income tax now is not due till October, and we're going to see a big surge in October rather than in April?
Exactly. So that's why, I mean, most of the state, I think all but 4 counties had their income tax payment deadlines extended from April to October.
Okay.
Both state and federal. So that's the big delay. So
thank you.
We hope it's a big surge, but it's going to be a little less than they expected. So right now, when the budget was released, there's about a $22 billion deficit. We're looking at probably something closer to 30 now. Easily could keep up near 40, but all things are done. But that is not going to slow our efforts to try and secure funding for transit. I mean, there's been a lot of activity. Senator Scott Wiener has been an incredible advocate for transit across the state, and he continues to push for that, along with several other members. A lot of members from Golden Gate Bridge District, Senator Dodd and McGuire, and others have been helpful with that effort. While there's been some hearings and overall, I think there's interest in recognizing the need to provide something for transit. The deficit is going to make that more difficult, most likely focusing on kind of how you can make existing funding sources more flexible. This week, the California Transit Association kind of released its major kind of request for funding for transit statewide. They put out a $5 billion proposal that's over 5 years. Most of that is from existing resources and kind of moving things around. Part of it is the sales tax on diesel, which normally funds transit. 80% of it goes to transit, about 20% of it goes to local streets and roads, trying to capture 100% of that for transit. Dedicating greenhouse gas auction revenue. There's always extra revenue every year because of the way they do the forecast, and capturing that for transit. That can be used for operations as well. And then several other kind of policy changes and continuing the flexibility that's currently in place regarding, LCTOP, that's low carbon transit operation program funding that's can be used for much more operations, as well as what they call the state of good repair funds. Can be, instead of just used for capital, it can be used for operations as well. So all these things are in play, but like I said, with the budget, we won't really know until probably later towards the end of the session what that package is going to look like. The LAO has come out with its kind of reports on transit yesterday. They presented to the Senate Budget Subcommittee on that, kind of spelling out to the legislature, what the problem is, what the historical resources are for transit, and what the legislature could consider. And so that ranges from everywhere from creating new revenue sources to delaying the innovative clean transit rule requirements for transitioning to zero emission, making those delays a little longer, pushing those back to provide a little relief for transit. And so that's kind of where things are at. We're still, a little barreling down towards June. This is a process that's going to take all summer. So it is early in the process, but I'm optimistic something will happen. Whether it's going to be enough, I don't know. I think the legislature, the comments back so far is like, yes, we want to help, but you're not going to get something for nothing. They're going to want to see some performance measures. They're going to want to see some other reporting requirements, how that money is used, how transit operators change their service because of the changing, as Mona mentioned earlier, commute services still hasn't rebounded, but local service is starting to come around in a lot of areas of the state. So what are operators doing to address the current reality that we face? On the legislative front, like I said, there's, the first deadline is coming up. I can go into the Brown Act bills, but I don't know if you want me to wait until later. I can just, a lot of those have been sorted out. I'll go quickly through these. AB 557's moved forward. This is kind of just a cleanup of existing law on remote teleconferencing if there's a state of emergency declared. The Chaco bill has not been heard yet. Hopefully it'll be heard next week. This is for the subsidiary kind of advisory subgroups for legislative bodies. The PAPM bill, which is the most broad and most ambitious one to allow for remote meetings, was canceled, that hearing. So that's a 2-year bill. I had a feeling it wouldn't go very far because I know the chair of the Senate Local Government Committee does really strongly support the need for in-person meetings. And so that would probably look a little too far for her comfort. SB 411, this is a Portantino bill that was statewide. It's been amended to, as we expected, to apply only to the city of Los Angeles. So it would only apply to those neighborhood councils within the city of Los Angeles, which are basically advisory committees to the city. That was moved forward. And 537 Becker, this is what they call the multi-jurisdictional, so county-wide, region-wide, and a good fit for the first district, the bride for remote meetings. It was approved, but it was substantially amended by putting more restrictions on how that would work. So they still would want a majority of quorum in one location. And then if you were going to participate remotely, you had to be at least 40 miles away from where that meeting is at. So that could work. The bill is still a little confusing in how it's drafted, but it will probably be sorted out and how it will be applied because it uses plural versions of locations. And if you're going to be meeting remotely, it has to be in your office or in another public building. So it doesn't really specify where that has to be. Other bills we've been kind of tracking for closely. AB 321 we're kind of co-sponsor on. This would be would give a similar sales tax exemption for the purchase of zero emission ferries that are currently in place for zero emission buses. So it's just a portion of the state sales tax. That is an Assembly Revenue Tax Suspense file. Should be coming up next week before it goes to appropriations and moves forward. I assume it's going to move out of at least policy committee. Appropriations might be a little more difficult to move forward. AB 463 Hart, this is a CTA sponsored bill. Basically, we require the PUC and utilities, investor-owned utilities, to take into consideration the needs for charging buses and other transit vehicles when they're considering either rolling brownouts or public safety power shutoffs when they go forward. So that'd be part of the critical infrastructure they try to keep powered at all times. And then the other ones are kind of watching. And then there's a lot of legislation out there that's starting to develop. Assemblyman Friedman has a couple bills, 6 and 7, that kind of deal with planning for highway projects and transit projects to kind of promote more funding towards those directions. The bill's still kind of in a general outline right now, but she has a working group she's working on. So that might become of more interest to us as we get the details of what direction they're going to go. So I'm going to stop right there. That's a lot, and there's probably a lot of other things.
Thank you, Steve. Committee members, do you have any comments, questions? Steve, before we have Director Maston had a question. Is he on the line?
I am
He
on
is
the line, Jerry.
Most public comment, so
Oh, okay.
we're going to
All
take Mr. Pilpel
Oh,
first. Since
David,
Mr.
would
Pil-
you
Yep.
come to the podium, please?
All right.
David Pilpel, my first time in person in more than 3 years at any public meeting, so nice to be here. And you're meeting in the neighborhood, so I felt like if you're, bringing government to me, I should bring myself.
Thank you.
Meeting
Thank
more
you.
than halfway. So on this item, I think, let me just speak to finances now, and on the next item, I'll talk about the Brown Act bills. So I think this is very much related to the district's strategic financial plan. I'm looking forward to the report later on at the board meeting on that, and further to MPC's efforts on transit coordination and recovery in the region, and also increasing ridership to the extent that Mona talked about that earlier. We don't have people riding the bus, then there's no reason to run it and fund it and all that. So these things are all very related. As we all know, this district has tolls as a revenue source, which is relatively stable, and many other transit agencies don't have that and rely on other revenue sources. So I think the finances will work out for this district. How it plays out for the entire state, particularly as relates to TDA, STA, TIRCP, and other funding sources remains to be seen. But I appreciate the report from Sacramento on that, and I very much appreciate the update on the Brown Act bills, and I'll speak to that in a moment. Thanks very much for listening. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. Nice to see you in person. Any other comments?
We do. Justine, I'm going to turn it over to you for your end.
Thank you. Good morning. We have one comment, and that is from Jim Maston. Can you go ahead?
Yeah, good morning. Wish I was there with you in person. My questions or comments related to the Brown Act bills, but those were answered, so I actually have no comments.
All right.
I'll end my comments with no comments. Thank you.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing you next month too. So, all right. Any comments from the members? Do you want to take action on any of the bills? I know I know our Director Snyder and I were talking about SB 411, but now that is strictly Los Angeles.
So we can take that up on the next item. So then we'll just finish
Oh.
item 3 and then go to number 4.
Okay. Steve,
So-
anything?
I'll do 4. SB 411?
Yeah.
Yes, it's been amended to apply only to the city of Los Angeles. Okay. So it's what they call neighborhood councils within the city that are actually created part of the city's charter.
Okay. All right, so we'll finish out number 3 and then we'll go to number 4.
Does anyone want to take a stand on any of the bills then?
The Brown Act bills will cover under the next item.
Right.
Right.
Because I think there is some interest.
So
Okay.
that was just informational from Steve.
Okay, let's go on to the next item, item number 4, discussion of possible action regarding the Brown Act related bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, members of the public and staff. Every December, the board adopts a legislative platform that provides direction to staff on legislation, such that if the bill is going to give us money, we're allowed to support it. If it takes money away, we're allowed to oppose it, and it covers a variety of policy issues. When the board adopted the legislative platform last December, it did not include any direction on the Brown Act. There's a flurry of Brown Act bills. Now that we're back to in-person meetings, we thought we would highlight some of those. And we want to draw your attention to 2 in particular that you may wish to take a position on, to monitor, or to even support. The first one is AB 817, and Steve did a lovely presentation on all the bills, including these bills. AB 817 would apply to subsidiary bodies, such as your advisory committees, your Accessibility Advisory Committee, your Bike Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and others. And it would provide some flexibility in enticing people to participate in those committees. With the advent of the pandemic and being remote for 3 years, Folks have gotten used to it. The advisory committees for this district do not make decisions, they make recommendations. And so there may be some benefit for those bodies to have the flexibility to participate remotely. We are struggling as we speak to replenish some of those committees because of the need to meet in person now. We had to cancel recently the Accessibility Advisory Committee just because folks said, I don't want to meet in person because of some of the status of some of those individuals. And so we want to draw your attention to that. It is not a broad bill. It is limited in its focus. I might add that Steve talked about how the most broad bill was punted, so it's a 2-year bill. I would also like to add that earlier this week, the Los Angeles Times editorial board issued a strong editorial about the Brown Act and their displeasure with the number and breadth of bills seeking amendments to the Brown Act. And that's just good context and background to have. But the other bill we want to draw your attention to would affect this body. Steve talked about that also. SB 537 deals with regional agencies. And as Steve highlighted, when it went through the Senate Government and Finance Committee, they did add some restrictions. And one is that you cannot participate remotely unless you meet 2 criteria. One is that your remote location is 40 miles away from the meeting location. And the other is that you participate from your office or in a publicly accessible building. And as Steve said, the wording is somewhat inartful, but that is something that would be applicable to this body. Some of you travel great distances. So we felt that at a minimum, we should tee it up for your discussion to see if you want to talk about it. And if you wanted to take action, it is agendized such that we could legally take action today on the bill, whether it's to monitor it or support it. So with that, I'll be quiet and turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, General Manager. Any comments from the?
Yeah, I would move that we support SB 537.
Support.
Second.
It's been moved and second, we support SB 537. Becker.
Is there any interest in 817 for the
I was going
I was gonna move that
to do that
separately.
separately, but I'm fine combining it.
Which is what?
I would make a motion to support both of them. We can
Okay.
do
817
and
Pacheco and SB 537.
Yeah.
Is a second still?
Carry the second.
Still a second. Got a
I
second.
just have a question.
Yes, as somebody who's very well versed in advisory committees, I've noted that we have far better attendance with the public. Since we went to that, we used remotely during the pandemic. A lot of the advisory committees outside of this group meet at night, which means that you have to go down to a hearing room in City Hall and get all the people you want to, participate, and it just doesn't work very well. So I would say for a number of reasons, advisory committees, because they're not doing legislation, they're just recommending. I think there should be more flexibility.
Patty?
Yes, thank you. This is more a comment than a question, but also perhaps a question. It struck me, and I've learned a new word, inartful. That's really good. Was that AB 557 that you referred to?
Yes. And I'll let Steve, if you want to speak to it, or any other comments on the item of supporting potentially AB 817.
Well, yeah, I mean, not being an attorney, I would leave it to the Brown Act attorneys to figure. It talks about, when it's a quorum must be present in locations within the jurisdiction. So I don't know if that means more than one location, or it could be one. I think the intent is for one location for a quorum, but that's not what it says. Exactly. Yeah.
It allows for the remote. Great. It was the inartful that got derailed. Okay.
Yeah. So
No, it's all good.
definitely needs to be some cleanup. The other thing I wanted to point out on 817 and on all these other bills is I didn't list in here the other requirements that are normal for this process, which means public participation through telephone or internet access. So that continues the same kind of ability for the public to speak and make comments. It all remains the same through all these bills. The one thing on 817 I noticed, and I'd have to double check on the others, is that it requires, if you're going to have these remote meetings for advisory bodies, they have to be both voice and video. They have to be seen on camera in order to participate. So,
Carol?
Yeah, I have a procedural question. We are voting on these bills as described here and as we've heard them described by you. Suppose they are amended in such a way that substantially changes the description.
We would seek the item to support the bill as currently written, and if they're edited in a minor fashion, that doesn't substantially change the meaning, because we're not asking you to seek a general free pass on Brown Act bills, such as the Pappen bill would propose, but within the confines of these today with minor modifications so that advisory committees could be remote and that regional bodies that would have to travel great distance would be remote. Bills that achieve those outcomes is what we're really seeking, and these are the two current vehicles for that.
So with the understanding that that is the meaning behind the motion and the second, and looking to the author of the motion to make sure that's fine, then I'm supporting that.
And the second as well?
Maybe it was Steve, what was the reference to the 40-mile rule?
That's in 537. So that means what they're saying is if the meeting location is, if your office, like city council office, supervisor office, where you work from, is more than 40 miles away from that meeting location, then you can participate remotely. So
and that was added subsequent to the printing of your staff report. So that's why it's not included in that, and that's why we highlighted it here today.
Okay.
So when it went to the Senate Government Committee, they added that restriction so that if it's 3 miles away, you got to show up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Director Rabbit?
Yeah, thank you very much. For the record, I looked up. I'm 41 miles from my home.
Well, that's here.
Yeah, I'm screwed if we get back to the toll plaza. This has come up in a lot of different entities that I serve on, and I just state my piece. I think that if you're elected, if you're paid a stipend, or if you're assigned or elected by a representing body, you show up.
Yeah.
Personally, and I totally agree that the advisory bodies, because those are volunteers that are, and sometimes, hell, we have disability advisory bodies, and they're really reason to take advantage of the virtual mechanisms that we have now. But after having gone through 2.5, 3 years meetings, I like looking at people in the face and in person, and I think that the work gets better that way. Understanding, of course, this body has those that have to travel quite a far distance. So that's just my 2 cents. I'm supportive of. I do think that there needs to be some changes to allow for the advisory bodies and a little more flexibility. I think there's a little bit of a fear. I don't know if it's about Bell or what, but that's my take.
Okay. Steve, what do you think? There's going to be more changes to both these bills, I assume.
Yeah, I would imagine as it goes through. I mean, as we saw last year with the bill that tried to provide an option, as it went through, it got, I think, more muddled and difficult to implement, and that's why we're back here with new legislation. Yeah. But hopefully that won't happen with these. But I think they will get sorted out. I think the advisory body one makes sense. The others are going to be, I think, a little more difficult. I think Portantino's is more of an advisory body one just for his district. That likely go through 537. I think it's going to be difficult as it gets to the Assembly Local Government.
Do we have other speakers possibly on the line?
Well, we do. We have a public speaker on this one in the room. We have David Pilbell who would like to comment on this item. And then I'll turn it to Christine. Yeah.
Great, David Pilbell again. So I support the 3 bills that I think I heard the most about, AB 557, AB 817, and SB 537. I think the motion was just to support 2 of them. Okay. I think it wouldn't hurt for the district to also support AB 557 as the general cleanup measure and allowing teleconferencing meetings to eliminate the sunset clause in there. You might also want to seek amendments, particularly for SB 537 on the 40-mile limitation and the provisions about a quorum. As you said, I'm sure there will be some finagling of the language as it goes through. It doesn't just affect this district. It affects a lot of agencies throughout the state. And I assume that you're working not just with CTA, but also the California Special Districts Association, the League, CSAC, the Association of Water Agencies. There are a lot of special districts that this would apply to that are multi-jurisdictional as defined in the bill. Although it's not currently in any legislation that I've read, I actually support the concept of an annual meeting being hybrid, allowing the members or requiring the members to meet in person and allowing public participation either in person or remotely, but allowing other meetings to be either remote or hybrid at the agency's discretion. I do agree that advisory bodies or subsidiary bodies, as they're defined, should be allowed to have all remote meetings. And I think as written, the district would be able to make the findings with regard to its 4 advisory bodies, one of which I serve on. And it looks to me like only 537 is currently an urgency measure, so that would take effect immediately if passed by a 2/3 vote. The others, if they get through the legislature, which is a big if, right? Yeah, a big if, would take effect no earlier than January 1st of 2024. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks for listening.
All right.
Justine, would you like to poll your public line, or have you pulled the public line to see if there's any speakers on the line?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I did poll earlier. If you'd like me to poll again, not a problem.
Sure.
Is there anybody who's great? Is there anyone who's on the line this morning that would like to speak? Please use ** to unmute yourself and let me know. Anyone who has any comment on this item or public comment?
Justine, it's Jim. I'd like to comment, please.
Certainly. Is there anyone else who has comment this morning? Please use ** to unmute yourself and let me know. Okay, I'm not hearing anybody else. Jim Maston this morning, Madam Secretary.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so now I have a comment. So I'm sure we'll be wading through a lot more weeds before all of this is settled. But at the moment, it sounds like the most reasonable bills are SB 537 and AB 817 for our support. That's all my comment.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. All right. We have before us a motion and a second to support AB 817 and SB 537. So, Madam Secretary, you want to take the roll, please?
Will do. So we did become a committee of the whole. We have joining us supervisors, directors Dorsey and Sefai. So I just wanted to let everyone know that that's also who's in the room. So when I go through the list, I'm doing a roll call vote now. I'm going to start with Director Conroy, who's absent. Director Dorsey. Director Incardio is absent. Director Garbarino.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Grosball.
Yes.
Director Hernandez. Director Maston. Oh, is absent. Thank you for commenting, by the way. Director Moulton Peters is absent. Director Parr is absent. Director Rabbit.
Aye.
Director Rodoni is absent. Director Safai.
Here.
Director Snyder is absent. Director Stephanie is absent. Director Thier.
Aye.
Second Vice President Hill.
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
And President Theriault.
Aye.
Thank you. You have 10 ayes.
Okay. What is it now?
So we're done with public comment?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
We just did our public comment. We just did all that together. And then we can adjourn.
Okay. Okay, is there anything else to be brought before this committee? If not, we'll adjourn.